Did President Trump legalize weed last week? On today's episode, we talk with Jason Ortiz, the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Last Prisoner Project, to find out exactly what does this executive order even mean. Is cannabis legal? Is it illegal? Schedule 1, Schedule 3? Does it end any arrest? Does it make billionaires in the cannabis industry even richer? Let's find out more on today's episode of KalikoVision. Welcome to KalikoVision, a podcast devoted to helping you see clearly in the seemingly post-fact era of smoke and mirrors. We'll be interviewing people from all walks of life, each with a unique vision for the future. Now more than ever, it is critical for each of us to harness our strengths and our skill sets to take control of our collective destiny. Strap in and let's see where today's conversation takes us. It's time for another episode of KalikoVision.
America, we have come so far. We have seen so much. But there's so much more to do.
What makes this movement unique is we are taking on the corporate establishment. We are taking on the greed of Wall Street.
What are we talking about? We're talking about a hedge fund that serves a bunch of billionaire family offices? Who cares?
It is a movement which says the United States will have health care for all as a human right.
This is our chance to answer that call.
Let them get wiped out. Who cares? They don't get to summer in the Hamptons? Who cares?
Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time.
This is about our lives. This is about American lives.
And that shows you what one voice can do. One voice can change a room. And if it can change a room, it can change a city. And if it can change a city, it can change a state. And if it can change a state, it can change a nation. And if it can change a nation, it can change the world.
Okay, aloha everybody. Welcome back to another episode of KalikoVision. I'm your host, Kaliko Castille, former president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, co-founder of Thunderstorm Strategies. I'm really excited to talk to you today. We haven't done an episode in a few months, but I'm really fired up after hearing the latest news out of the White House today, which is that President Trump has now signed an executive order calling for the reclassification of cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. You guys have probably seen similar headlines before and think to yourself, isn't this something that's already happened before? Because the Biden administration did actually already call for this process and actually had kicked it off when the Health and Human Services Department had actually told the DEA back in 2024 that they thought it should be rescheduled to Schedule 3. But today, Donald Trump signed an executive order. I'll read a little bit from Marijuana Moment and then introduce today's guest. But this is from Tom Angel and Kyle Yeager over Marijuana Moment. Marijuana will be federally rescheduled under an executive order signed by President Donald Trump on Thursday. The directive also aims to address federal hemp laws to promote access to full spectrum CBD that could be covered under federal health insurance plans. Months after Trump said a decision on the cannabis reform proposal was imminent, the president issued the directive for agencies to begin moving forward with the plan to transfer cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. So I am really excited to be joined on the show today to talk with one of my good friends, Jason Ortiz, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives, I believe, at the Last Prisoner Project. He's the former president also of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, also former executive director of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, really good friend of mine, fighter in the movement. But we're excited to have him on the show to talk a little bit about the reaction to this and the state of the industry. Jason, welcome back to KalikoVision. How are you, sir?
Doing all right. It's an exciting day. Whether this is going to be a good day or a bad day for the movement in the long term, we're going to find out. But it is good that there is action happening at the federal level on cannabis to really provoke conversation about what type of reform do we really need, and is this action going to be sufficient to get us where we want to go?
For sure. Let's start at the beginning and kind of like lay a little context for folks before we talk about today's executive order. For folks that don't know, the current classification system, the way the federal government organizes drugs, is in what they call a schedule. The schedule is organized in 5 different levels, with Schedule 1 being the most restrictive schedule, which currently is the schedule for cannabis, LSD, several other what people think of as being high intense drugs, right, with high impact for abuse, low accepted medical use. And so that is where cannabis has stood. Most people understand it doesn't belong in Schedule 1.
Sure.
You have things like alcohol that do not exist in the schedule at all. But now today's executive order and what the Biden administration had said a couple of years ago or a year ago was that it should be moved to Schedule 3. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of those schedules, Jason, and kind of your work in drug policy reform and kind of like where this sort of like history is with cannabis being a Schedule 1 drug, but clearly having medical benefits? Like people are clearly having accepted medical use, even if it doesn't reflect it in the federal schedule. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. And so the CSA, the Controlled Substances Act, was actually created under Nixon back in the 70s. And I think the most important thing for folks to realize is that, especially then, but even still today, it is not based on science, right? So a lot of the more commonly used recreational drugs are placed in Schedule 1. And so that was like heroin, psychedelic mushrooms, MDMA, and cannabis are all at the highest, most restrictive level possible that create the strongest penalties and also make it very difficult for research or for hospitals to use them as medicine. Now, as you go down the list, Schedule 2, 3, 4, or 5, it's less restrictive penalties, easier to research, and more access for your common consumer. For example, cocaine is Schedule 2, and ketamine, which is actually a drug that is being used more and more these days, is Schedule 3, as is Tylenol with codeine is also Schedule 3. So by moving cannabis to Schedule 3, it's going to place it in the same category as ketamine and codeine. And so this does, in some aspects, improve the situation as far as research. It is easier to have the IRB or other official channels like approve research for cannabis. And it also makes it where there are certain tax restrictions that are said to not apply, that apply to Schedule 1 and 2 substances, what is known as 280E. And so this is an IRS tax deduction rule that says if you're a business that engages with any substance that is a Schedule 1 or 2, you cannot write off your cost of goods sold or other expenses on your taxes. So in total, right, that the move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 will relieve some tax burden for businesses, will open up possibly some research potential. And it is the most historic shift in cannabis since the 70s, since, American history first, America first prohibited cannabis to begin with. And so while it is a step forward, some of the things that it will not do, and it's actually questionable if this is a step forward, and we can talk about that. I'm sure Kaliko has some strong feelings about that. But I will say it is the biggest move since the 70s on cannabis. But it will not decriminalize any cannabis across the country. It will not legalize any of the illegal stores that you currently see in half of the country. It will not let anyone out from prison. And so anything related to criminal justice reform, anything related to most of the industry will not be impacted in a positive way. It is essentially neutral. Right now, what it can do is now place cannabis under the ruling of the FDA and a number of other agencies that previously were not putting out rulemaking around this because it was a Schedule 1 substance. And so now, by moving it to Schedule 3, the FDA has enforcement powers to say all of the different dispensaries that are currently selling cannabis are selling without an FDA license, which is a new charge that could be placed on the industry. Now, if you are a company that is, a larger pharmaceutical company, this may be a situation where now you want to get involved in the cannabis space because you can have cannabis, or at least cannabinoid products, go through the FDA for approval. Epidiolex was a CBD medicine that was descheduled many years ago. And one interesting thing about the rescheduling order today is there's actually quite a focus on CBD and access for CBD. And it did make it where there will be some partnerships that are going to expand access for CBD. A big chunk of it was encouraging the various federal agencies to work with Congress to create a piece of legislation that would properly regulate hemp-derived cannabinoids. And so some folks may have also heard of the hemp ban that recently passed when the government reopening bill passed. And that meant that all of the hemp-derived cannabinoids were going to be banned and returned to Schedule 1 year from that date, which was last November. And so now we're in a very strange situation where, because the hemp ban has a delay, we have a year where hemp-derived cannabinoids are still federally legal. However, an impending ban is coming. The Trump administration has now said they want to encourage hemp-derived cannabinoids for being produced and make it easier to become regularly approved products, while at the same time, the cannabis plant itself, with THC specifically, is still Schedule 1. And so things are moving in all these different directions, and it can be difficult to kind of keep up where things are at. And then lastly, I'll just say that this order does not immediately reschedule cannabis. What it does is it instructs the Attorney General to expeditiously, is the word used in the actual executive order, reschedule cannabis. So that could be a day, it could be a month, it could be years before the rescheduling actually takes effect. There are some things that would slow down the process, even if the Attorney General Pam Bondi were to do it today. There's likely to be litigation. So that means someone will sue to say that the way the Trump administration is doing this is unconstitutional or illegal for various reasons. One of those things is that if we are to reschedule cannabis in this sort of unilateral way without going through Congress, it would violate international treaties. Those international treaties say you cannot just randomly reschedule cannabis or deschedule cannabis without bringing it to the United Nations and adjusting the treaties. Now, that being said, one, the United States has never cared about international treaties and they have violated them constantly. But also you have countries like Canada that did legalize cannabis and there was no repercussions at the international level. So a lot of this is still up in the air of what exactly it's going to mean. There's a lot of details to still work itself out. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about how the advocacy community can push the decision in one way or another, and where exactly do we go from here for all the folks that want to see cannabis fully descheduled, fully decriminalized, and all the prisoners released from prison. We definitely still have a lot of work to do on that aspect of it, but I do think the advocacy movement is ready for it. We've been prepping for this moment for a long time, and now it's ready to see, are we able to actually push back on the situation that we're seeing and achieve what we really want, which is full descheduling and full legalization.
I appreciate that breakdown very much. I think, like, for me, a couple years ago started calling this that we were entering our Empire Strikes Back moment for the movement, and it feels like we're at the end of that movie right now, and hoping to figure out whether we are going to actually see the return of the Jedi. I think one of the things that would really struck me with today's executive order that actually, there's a fascist in the White House. I will give him zero praise, right? But I do think the advocates who managed to get the CBD and Medicare aspect of this executive order inserted into here was huge, right? So for folks who don't know, one of the other aspects of this is that he basically said that they're going to allow doctors to prescribe CBD, hemp-derived CBD products, and they're also going to instruct Medicare services to also provide potentially up to $500 a year in hemp-derived CBD products directly to Medicare patients, right? So that seems to me like a much different conversation. Some of the advocates have been talking about for a while, getting medical cannabis covered under insurance, but reimbursed through insurance. But what are your thoughts about that Medicare and sort of CBD aspect of this?
It's the wildest thing that I've heard in a long time. It is a huge step forward for cannabis-based medicine to be approved through Medicaid and Medicare. One of the things is that Medicaid and Medicare are two of the biggest programs in the United States government. The amount of money that goes through Medicaid and Medicare is absolutely tremendous. And so for those entities that have been selling or producing CBD medicine, this is a huge win for them. And it is a huge win as far as cannabis medicine being accepted as a real medicine that should be covered by insurance and normalized in the basic U.S. healthcare system. Now, the choice to focus on CBD is very interesting. Clearly, there were some lobbyists and advocates that really made this happen. We did see Trump signal that he was moving in this direction when he posted a video a few months ago that was touting the benefits of CBD medicine. And so it is definitely a historic step forward. However, it is a historic step forward, in the direction of pharmaceutical companies being the folks that really own and operate and push for cannabis medicine. And so depending on who you are, right, this is either the greatest thing that's ever happened, especially if you're somebody who is, say, a senior citizen who really enjoys or relies on CBD medicine to help address some of the ailments or the symptoms of other medicines. But I did not see that being part of a rescheduling executive order. And so the interplay between regulated cannabis or marijuana and hemp-derived cannabinoids is definitely getting very interesting. Now, whether or not this lends itself to other hemp-derived cannabinoids or other cannabis medicine being also included in Medicaid and Medicare remains to be seen. But I will say it is a giant leap forward that a cannabis-based medicine will be covered by Medicaid and Medicare. That's huge. And so we did notice that Dr. Oz being in the room when they first announced it kind of like hinted that they were going to do something about this. But it is a shocking development that most folks, I think, didn't see coming, especially because the CBD market and CBD craze, I'll say had sort of died down for a little bit. But this is going to be a fascinating thing to see. And it will long term, create a path for cannabis medicine to be included in the normal healthcare system in the United States. And that is a good thing, generally moving forward for the patients, whether it's going to be a good thing moving forward for businesses and for folks that want to see the plant fully decriminalized, maybe not.
Yeah, and I thought like one of the other sort of interesting aspects of the Medicare Medicaid debate is also that like they put full spectrum in the verbiage there, right? So I do think like hemp derived usually typically thinks of like things that don't have the other cannabinoids interacting with it. So I did find that interesting that they did specifically call out full spectrum CBD.
Which full spectrum CBD is definitely a strange phrase, right? Because like CBD, the molecule is not full spectrum. As I understand it, full spectrum is when you have the entire plant, right? So like RSO oil or, Rick Simpson oil, for those that don't know, which is a very high concentration CBD oil that is derived from extracting from the full plant. So you're also going to have THC and all the other cannabinoids. And in essence, you want to preserve the entourage effect, which is where all the cannabinoids work together to be able to have a stronger impact. And so like the phrasing of full spectrum CBD is just an odd way to phrase that. One other thing that I think is interesting is that through the FDA specifically, but generally on the Controlled Substances Act, you don't have whole plants that are rescheduled in different schedules, right? Schedule 1 is the only one that has like psilocybin mushrooms and, the cannabis plant, but generally it's individual molecules that get rescheduled or scheduled onto the Controlled Substances Act. So this will be the first time that like a botanical, as it's called, but like the full plant is moved. And what does that mean for FDA approval in different types of drugs and different types of medicines, right? Like it's unlikely that like smoking flower or consuming flower is going to be approved in any way, shape, or form, right? It's more likely that single-use drugs, that the FDA tends to do it, right, as a single molecule or a combination of molecules that addresses a particular issue or issues is what gets approved to the FDA. And so I do want to point that out, that like the idea of the whole plant getting rescheduled is a strange thing, like for a Controlled Substances Act. And so it remains to be seen how that changes things as we move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that really kind of also came up for me, I'm curious like your opinions on it. I think like when we're first hearing that he was going to put out an executive order calling for rescheduling to Schedule 3, like and even seeing the executive order today, like in my head, I kind of feel like it's somewhat the Schedule 3 aspect of it is a nothing burger, because this is something that, the Biden administration had begun already and they started their process. They already said it should move to Schedule 3 after a very extensive HHS review process, and then, ran into the hurdles that the DEA is naturally going to run into. But I've seen some folks in various interviews and reactions today say that they kind of feel like this is like the reason why this is different is because it feels like a call to action and that there's a tied timeline to it. And I heard Dr. Oz in the press conference today say that they're expecting to try to do this Medicare, Medicaid CBD thing in the first quarter, right? So the first 3 months of 2026. Any thoughts on whether you think this is actually going to happen, or whether somehow this executive order is actually going to force the DEA to finish this process?
Sure. And this is one that like literally my phone is like still blowing up with details as far as like what can and can't happen. It is entirely possible that the Attorney General can just reschedule cannabis without going through the DEA process, right? So it is possible that they could come out tomorrow and say cannabis is rescheduled. Now, if they do that, there will be litigation that says that it is illegal for them to skip the other process in the Controlled Substances Act. Again, the Trump administration has not been one to be particularly worried about whether or not their actions are violating the law or the Constitution, and they simply move forward and kind of say, stop me situation, right? Now, The previous process under Biden was going to go through the DEA. We're going to have public hearings. There's going to be this long, drawn-out process, and it looks like they're going to skip that process. And from my understanding, the Attorney General can just skip that entire process and reschedule. Now, this would run counter to international law, so there would also be issues there, but it's entirely possible they can. The Medicaid and Medicare part, that seems like it would take much longer. It does not require Congress to do any of these things. Now, the entire hemp regulatory structure seems like that it would require Congress, although Congress also has not shown that it is willing to stand up to Trump or slow down anything that they're trying to do. So in reality, it's entirely possible that Dr. Oz and the other folks in the Medicaid and Medicare system have been working on this for a very long time. And so it may be that they have already had this in the works for a while and are simply implementing it now. And that's how to be able to do it so quickly because they've already been working on it for a while. So it is possible. It would be something that is definitely unprecedented. But again, this admin has definitely shown that it is willing to just push things through, say, try and stop me. And I think if that is what happens, it will become law, even if people challenge it.
Doesn't this kind of like make us feel stupid, having worked so hard through the Obama and the Biden administrations and even Bush administrations, and have them tell us that the president did not have the power to direct this process to happen? Right? Like it feels like we've been gaslighted this entire time. And now we finally get to a person who, like you said, doesn't give a fuck about the Constitution, like thoroughly embraces the unitary executive theory and is basically doing whatever he wants. And like you said, like the typical balance, checks and balances, like Congress, are just sitting back saying nothing. You got Republicans kind of complaining, but they're not going to do anything, right? So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that idea that like we've been told for several administrations that the president did not have the power to use the executive order to basically make this process happen, and maybe in the course of a couple of months we might see this actually swap?
I mean, it is definitely just sort of the continuation of disappointment in the Democratic Party, both their leadership and their boldness to do the things that they can while they have power, right? Like Biden did have a situation where we had control of the Senate, the House, and the presidency, and we could have done this, but they chose not to. And so I think, you know, in a weird way, Trump is proving, right, that when you're in a position of power, you can do whatever you want. And so they chose not to do this for the longest time. Now Trump is also going to get the credit for moving on something that the entire country's been waiting for both parties to do for decades. And so the Democrats not only dropped the ball on this, but they handed the ball to the Republicans to be able to say that they're the ones that made the progress on this issue that used to be a Democrat Party issue. Now, of course, for the most part, advocates in the Democratic Party were also trying to make sure that things like equity, criminal justice reform, prisoner release were all going to be part of this process. And so our efforts there to be comprehensive have definitely created a situation where the Republican just said, you know what, we're just going to do it and change the rules. Reparations, criminal justice reform, repairing historical harms to communities, be damned. Like, we don't worry about any of those kind of things. And so it is very frustrating because the Democratic Party are the only folks that we can turn to actually move on things, like when supposedly if they win, we're going to be able to do good things. And it is just heartbreaking to see not only like this issue where they're just going to completely drop the ball, but like likely on other issues too. And so it is true, like they lied to us, right? And I think it's important that we don't let them off the hook for that, because we could have done this and done it more effectively, both under Obama and under Biden. And we fought with them tooth and nail to just try to get some progress to move forward. And it didn't happen. And like, in another weird way, like the one time the MORE Act passed, that was in Trump's lame duck session, right? And so it's like wild to me that like the Farm Bill, which originally made hemp legal and was the strongest act of descheduling that ever happened because it made hemp legal in all 50 states, was also under the last Trump administration. So we have the Democratic Party, who has sat here and said that we support this issue time after time, used it to get our votes, used it to get our activism, and yet Trump is the one that has in many ways, like multiple ways, taken the strongest action moving forward on cannabis policy. Like, what an absolute disaster, and like they should be ashamed of themselves. And we have folks like Chuck Schumer, who were supposed to be our champion on things like the Cannabis Administration and Opportunities Act that blocked progress and made it where we weren't going to get anything done. So it is such a perverse and like absurd moment to be in, where the Republicans are the ones moving on cannabis policy multiple times. The Democrats are the folks that are blocking progress. And we end up with these bizarre policies that just don't benefit the communities that have been most impacted by the war on drugs. And we haven't seen very many prisoners be released who have been in there for 20 or 30 years, right? Like we have folks like Edwin Rubis, who got sentenced to 40 years in federal prison for a crime that didn't even involve him getting caught with any cannabis whatsoever. And neither Biden nor Trump pardoned him, right? But we have all this progress on cannabis policy. And so it's just been a very frustrating situation with the Democrats. And I do think the movement has to figure out how we're going to have a moment of accountability on the Democrats so that we can figure out how can we actually get things like full descheduling and full legalization to happen. But at this point in time, like there's no one in Congress that is really championing this issue in a way that it's necessary. And so as advocates, we have our own accountability moment of like, we've clearly missed the boat on making sure that our champions in Congress are strong, are pushing for this, are fighting the good fight. And so we're at a pretty low point in the advocacy movement in this particular moment, which I'm hopeful this rescheduling fight actually sparks a lot of action. But it's pretty clear that like the full legalization efforts, right, like need to be turned around a bit and re-strategize how we're going to approach this. But, you know, as you said, this is definitely an Empire Strikes Back moment. Up to this point in the last 10 years, we saw tremendous progress, especially at the state level for cannabis legalization, where in 2014, we had 0 states that had adult use, and now we're at 24 states. So it was inevitable that there was going to be, you know, a response from the other side to really move on this. And, you know, the movie doesn't end, you know, the trilogy doesn't end after the Empire Strikes Back, right? Like the Jedis do return and figure out a way to, you know, get rid of Palpatine and, you know, restore, you know, balance to the Force more or less. So I think this is our moment, right? We got to get out in the swamp, do some training, figure out how we got to get stronger, and then come back to this ready next year to really push in a way that we never have before. The positive side is there is lots of conversation around our issue, more conversation than there's ever been between hemp and rescheduling. Folks are looking at cannabis in a lot of different ways. And so we do have the attention of the nation. The question is, can we put into place a movement strong enough to turn that attention towards what we really need, which is full legalization?
I definitely want to dive into that as we decide we need to head to the Force of Endor to prepare our battle plan here.
Right, yeah.
I am kind of curious, like, because, you know, I think
I know, man. It's so disappointing. It's like hard to figure like, what do we do with this? Because like the hemp situation was like Republican legalization, right? Like it didn't have equity in it. But it was the biggest act of decrim that we've ever seen. So it's like, we don't want to oppose like this movement but it was also completely unregulated, had all kinds of wild products with 100 milligram gummies in gas stations. I remember I was in Connecticut, right? I fought this fight for a long time. And I come out one day and I go to my local gas station and there's this giant sign that says buy THC here. And I was just like, wait a minute, like, how is this possible? Like I would have known if something made this like possible. And I went in and looked at all the products and it was like, oh, this is hemp. And so it's wild just to see how quickly things can shift in different directions. But it was, you know, disappointing in a way because we had fought so long to make sure we got the regulations right and we got all the different licensing structures so people could be benefited, community reinvestment. And then out of nowhere, it's just like this whole hemp industry pops up. And so between the hemp space, rescheduling, like just everything is such a mess. And it's very clear that like, it is business and industry that are driving the decisions that are made at the congressional level. And if we are not able to mobilize enough people power to provide a counterpoint or a counterweight to that, we're just going to continue to get steamrolled. And that is a spot that I think we're in now. One thing I will say is that it's been a bit of a struggle. Like as someone who's been in the advocacy movement for a long time, we lost a lot of our great activists to the industry or to folks becoming regulators, and so they can't be as outspoken to things. And also the like financial side of investment from philanthropy into the advocacy space dried up because now there's a lot of industries. And so the philanthropists are like, why am I going to invest in this if you have a whole industry? I'm not going to invest millions of dollars in advocacy just to support businesses that are already making lots of money. But at the same time, the businesses themselves are not investing in advocacy because we would challenge their monopoly in a lot of these states. and instead sending their money directly to the president, right? And so we have major cannabis operators who just donate millions of dollars directly to Trump to make this happen. And so we're seeing, what happens when bribery, corruption, nepotism are just like par for the course. And we're up against some really serious amounts of money, and we have to figure out a way that we're going to mobilize enough people power to push back. But it is a very difficult situation for us. And so we do need more people to join us, and we're figuring out how we can fight the good fight in your state, because while this is it is a busy time for advocacy space, right? Like we definitely are going to need a lot of help to get this done, right? So we're going to need the Mandalorians and the Jedis and all the Ewoks and Chewbacca and everybody to come together to actually make sure that we slay the big beast. And at the end of the day, and this is something that we learned with MCBA, right? Like drug policy cannot and will never fix capitalism. Right now, we're seeing what happens when social justice advocates create our monster in this industry and capitalism is now taking over the space. That is going to be a major tension and point of strategic discussion, because now we're up against billions, right? And that is a very different situation. So, it's a very juicy moment where there's a lot of different factors, a lot of different things that can happen, but it is definitely going to be an uphill battle. Even if we do have the attention of the world watching us to see what we're going to do.
Man, I think your quote there, drug policy will not fix capitalism. I've heard you say it before, but it is an important reminder. But I think that's the most frustrating thing about this moment in particular. Like you laying out all of these wins coming from the Trump administration. It's because the fuckers who have the money and the capital in this industry were made for this moment, right? This is the kind of grift, corruption, and political pay-to-play system that they do best in, right? Sure. And like it's frustrating to see that, like, and I'm just I'll say it here. No one's paying my paychecks in cannabis right now. Kim Rivers from True Leave, right? Like her husband went to jail for corruption, for paying money to a local official in order to get a leg up on licensing down in Florida. This is a company who has already shown they are willing to do pay to play and be literally corrupt. Right? Yep. Now, this same person has put millions of dollars into legalization efforts in Florida that would have shut everyone else out except for the existing medical operators and said, sorry, it's only because we have a single issue ballot initiative problem in Florida. It's not our fault. That's not why we're putting $40 million into this. Now, the same person gave $1 million plus to Trump's inauguration committee, shows up at his inauguration. Oh, and then we find out this week, some already knew, but find out this week that the chief of staff for President Trump, Susie Riles, was one of the main lobbyists for True Leave in Florida. And now, bingo, bango, bongo, True Leave is going to get hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks because of their insider track, and they're willing to pay money directly to the Trump administration to get this payout, right? And so you have all these people who are now doing their victory lap of, oh, we're going to get our fucking tax breaks, which I'll say first off, I advocated for years at MCBA and NCIA to end 280E, right? It's a dumb policy. Yeah. But we advocated that while at the same time advocating for broad-based policy reform that would actually help everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just really interesting to me, like you're talking about that, like we are finding ourselves in this moment that is made for the people who have elbowed everyone else out over the last 10 years. And I do think that we have to figure out what does it look like for people power to fight back against the money, because my concern and what I would sort of posit, as you said, philanthropy is gone. It's hard to raise money. We're losing a bunch of activists. I was bitching at a CEO of a software company of cannabis today, telling him that while he was bragging about putting millions of dollars into this rescheduling effort, they let NCIA and MCBA basically wither on the vine over the last few years, with very little money going into organizations that have a decade plus of advocating for small businesses and equitable policies, right? So I don't know. It is frustrating to see the grift and the corruption just go hand in hand with the same fuckers who have been fighting the idea of having a broad-based equitable reform policy.
Yeah, and wildly, the Attorney General Pam Bondi was the Attorney General of Florida before she became, one of Trump's personal lawyers. And so, Florida is really overrepresented in a lot of this particular situation, right? And so it is, frustrating. I don't think American corruption is anything new, right? I think we're seeing it unfold in a way that's very close to us right? But I think it is something that has been affecting American economics for a very long time. That being said, we are in the space now where like this isn't settled yet. So like we are moving towards a lot of different types of new policies. There still is a lot of fight to fight, and there's a lot of strange bedfellows that may be supporting us in different efforts. And so we are in a very pivotal moment for the movement and for the country of how drug policy and cannabis policy will be determined for generations to come, right? And I think that is the space that we should be focusing on and really understanding that like we have an opportunity here to shape things moving forward that we've never had before. And I think that is where most of our energies should be going towards, right? Like we have the ability to push for things like prisoner reform and decriminalization and all these other pieces. And at the same time, we know it's going to be very difficult with this particular Congress that just doesn't want to do anything, right? So it's just letting the Trump administration kind of run with the ball and saying, you know, we're going to go on vacation for another few weeks before the Epstein files drop. And we have to come up with just new ways of doing things. And so I'm hopeful that this sparks all the activists and all the folks like yourself that were like previously kind of like, I'm kind of checked out on this issue, nothing's happening, where now everybody's like, oh, okay, red alarm, like we need to start moving on this. And I think there are sufficient activists still, like amazing folks at the Last Prisoner Project, at the Drug Policy Alliance, at the Parabola Center, right? Like there are incredible numbers of regulators across the country that have been trying to do the right thing for a long time. So at the same time, it is one of the more difficult spaces. We've never had as many allies that we can try to unite together to make something really big happen. And so I don't want folks to think about this as all doom and gloom and like there's all these like terrible things that are happening. Yes, America is a corrupt nation, no doubt about it. But at the same time, America has always been the people to rise up and resist and push back on a lot of these different issues. And I think that's what we're going to have to do this time around as well.
Let's talk about rising up and pushing back. I mean, I think like the Democrats have been on track to potentially take back the House and win a little bit more power back in the midterms. You know, hopes, like, you know, God bless. I hope it all happens. Like, I think like realistically, the American democracy hangs in the balance. But I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts about sort of like what does reform look like now, where Trump's technically put his stamp of approval on the idea that cannabis has medical benefits? He's still fighting a bunch of members of his party, but what are sort of your prognosis for how we kind of move forward and try to still push for eventual descheduling and a you know, a system that's actually set up for, you know, for communities and for people rather than just the billionaire donors?
Yeah, so it depends how things go, but I am hopeful that the Democrats will be able to retake the House and maybe even the Senate, right? Like we'll see how that goes. But, you know, I want to temper expectations, like we mentioned earlier, that the Democrats have not actually followed through on a lot of this. What I'm hopeful happens in this next round of midterms, though, is a lot of the old guard Democrats are taken out, or at least pushed hard enough to be afraid of getting, you know, replaced, that they do move on some of these bigger issues. And so while Trump has put a stamp of approval on this, the way the Democrats can come back is to say that what Trump did was not enough. It was a bunch of smoke and mirrors, and we have to have full legalization that actually addresses all of the criminal justice and social justice goals that we've had from the beginning. That's where the movement comes in. It is on us to really push on the Democrats to make this a midterm issue, right? We have to be out there and going to people when they have their fundraisers or their town halls and really asking them and pressing them on full legalization and telling them, the Democrats, like, y'all dropped the ball on this issue. You let Trump run with it. Now we need you to do twice as much as we were asking before. And there's only one actual thing that is going to solve this problem once and for all, and that's full legalization, which means descheduling, releasing all the prisoners, and expunging all of the records and other collateral consequences for a drug arrest on your record. So I think we are in a moment where the midterms are coming up. The advocates are at least on high alert that we need to be able to do something. And so coming up with an electoral strategy, supporting folks that support full legalization, opposing folks that oppose legalization is going to be a must. It's an absolute bare minimum of what we need to do to really move this thing forward. So we have the people, we have the timely opportunity to really raise this issue on the bigger stage, and we just got to get out there and really push on every single incumbent, which is 535 of them, that this has to be something that we talk about. But there has to be a come to Jesus moment, you know, more or less, in the Democratic Party, that they messed up. They lost this issue to the Republicans, and the way to get it back is to come back and do it 10 times stronger and actually get the job done. It will require, this is the struggle with like full legalization. is that it will require legislation to go through Congress, right? And so in order to get that passed, you're going to need 218 votes in the House. So that means if the Democrats take the House, that's possible. The Senate becomes really difficult. You need 60 votes, which means depending on the numbers, you're going to need a number of Republicans to sign on with the Democrats to get it through. And they are very unlikely to do that. And that being said, there may be a handful that do. Then the legislation has to go to Trump's desk and he either signs it or he vetoes it, and now you need a 2/3 majority to overturn the veto. So it's going to take a tremendous lift to make that happen, but we got to start at the beginning. We got to push the Democrats to really move on this and see if we can get something through the House and then make it a bigger issue as we move forward. And then, of course, when the next president comes in, we're going to see a lot of folks that are either representing states with adult use cannabis or support the issue generally. And if we can get a Democratic president, maybe we can get it done. So there is a path to get us there, but it is going to take a fundamental shift in how we approach this, broadening out the conversation to other communities that aren't just drug policy communities, talking to the immigrant rights community about how this and immigration intersect, because of course, there have been lots of folks deported for cannabis, either crimes or just working in the industry. Even most recently, we saw Glass House Brands get raided by ICE and the DEA, where they detained 60 different people from that raid. And that was a legal, state legal cannabis operation, but it was used as a point of immigration enforcement, right? And so there's definitely lots of other ways that this impacts other communities. And it's going to be upon us to not just continue to talk to the same people that we've always been talking to, but making sure we're broadening the movement so it's a much more progressive and much more broad-based space, so that lots of folks that come from lots of different backgrounds are also considering it their issue. And I think that's the only way we're going to get sufficient people power to be able to push the Democrats alone. And so I think that's going to be another big part of our work. How do we make sure that folks that are in other types of movements and other issues see cannabis and drug policy reform as a way for them to also achieve their goals and join with us in solidarity to make this one of the most important issues of the election, of the midterms?
I appreciate that. As we get closer to wrapping up, I want to go deeper on a nuanced discussion here. Okay, I'm curious about your thoughts.
I want to see where we disagree. I want to see where you're like, no, Ortiz, you got it all wrong.
Well, and I don't know that it's a disagreement. I wonder, like, as I hear you say the need for the movement to come together, to coalesce, to sort of like have this, like, 535 member strategy, to be having an electoral strategy. I feel like having been in, us having been in the trenches together for so long, that like it felt like there was moments where we had a lot of that stuff building. Yes. As you said, like, I've been kind of disconnected for the last year because I've been working here in the state of Oregon, doing a lot of like local politics stuff. But I'm kind of curious, like, does that even exist, right? I know you've been working on Unity Week the last few weeks, and you've been taking people to DC and trying to show that we do have a unified voice, working for decriminalization and descheduling. But I'm curious, like, do you feel like that exists? And if not, like, what is missing? Because I look around, just for more context for folks, I look around and I see organizations that I had worked at previously, NCIA, who's only down to a few paid employees, but when I worked there previous to COVID, it was up over almost 25, right? Mm-hmm. At MCBA, we used to have paid staff. There's zero paid staff at MCBA anymore, right? So like, I'm curious, like, what does that actually look like? How are we going to actually organize the masses if there's not actually active investment in the organizations to make that possible? What are your thoughts?
So I think you're right that like the paid staff has shrunk dramatically, right? Like the infrastructure is definitely on life support at this point in time. That being said, there's still a lot of organizations that do have paid staff, and we don't need 100 staffers to do this thing. Right now, cannabis is still one of the most popular issues in American politics. We have between 70 and 80% for full legalization. So the latent power among the people is out there. Our job is to figure out how do we align all of that into a political force. And I don't think we necessarily need 100 staffers that are pulling folks in different directions. And there is always sort of like competition between the organizations. But I would be lying if I thought that like that 50 state strategy movement like currently exists. It definitely does not. We have lots of national organizers that move on things. And to your point, I do think we saw the beginning of it in 2024 when we did have the Unity Week of Action, where we had over 30 different organizations bring all their people together from both the progressive Democrat left and also the conservative and libertarian right, members of the industry, all types of different folks were represented. And we came together to say the one thing that will actually accomplish all of our goals is full descheduling and full legalization. So like, is alignment possible? Absolutely. We've seen it. And even during that Unity Week, we were able to knock on the door of every single congressperson, right? We had hundreds of actual in-person meetings, but we also went to every single office and made sure that they all got information on cannabis. So it is very possible for us to contact every single member of Congress. We did it in 2 days. Right. And so we've shown that we have the ability to do things like press conferences and big lobby days and protests at the White House. So the logistical part is definitely possible. Right. Our question is, can we scale up enough to make our issue relevant ahead of all the other issues in American politics that folks are going to be fighting for? Like, of course, healthcare and these premiums going up is going to be a really, serious problem. And so our challenge is always making sure that cannabis and drug policy is raised on the issue of importance. We have supports from the public, but it's not a top issue for most people. So I think one of the ways that we can do that, leverage the staff that we currently do have, leverage public support to make it that cannabis policy becomes an issue that folks have to talk about. And I think that is certainly possible with the movement we have today. One shift I think we're going to have to do is learning how to create big noise with a smaller group of people, right? Like we tend to try to do this in sort of the old school way of like, we're just going to throw a lot of people in DC and we're going to have big rallies and things like that. That's not what's going to work in the age of attention anymore, right? We're going to need smaller direct actions. We're going to need folks that are willing to go out there and do civil disobedience or turn a table over or flip, somebody's water bottle in order to get the news to cover it. And that is going to have to be a shift we're going to have to make. The other piece is, of course, new media and figuring out how we can get aligned with a lot of the folks in the podcast space or other types of influencers that already agree with us, right? You have folks like Joe Rogan and Hassan Piker that agree with this issue, right? Can we get them on board to really start talking about this as a big issue and highlight the actions that we're taking already? Absolutely. So I think we don't have the 50-state strategy. If you look at it like we're talking early 2000s Howard Dean kind of approach to 50-state strategy, I think we have to shift this over into the new media environment and the new ways that people are talking about political issues. And in that sense, we don't need a ton of people. We need a really smart, sharp strategy to get there. And I think that we can pull off and create.
I love that perspective, and I appreciate a little positivity in a moment when I'm being a little but I do think that I will say it here, Schedule 3 seems like it's going to be happening. 280E seems like it will eventually go away. So I'm looking for every single MSO and every investor to be putting their money where their mouth is. I've been hearing for several years that this was just going to be one step on the pathway to eventual legalization, that this isn't everything we want. It's just a step in the right direction. So I just want to see everyone working in lockstep, continuing to march towards this eventual end of prohibition. So that's my challenge out to everyone who's celebrating today with the Schedule 3 news. How much of your Schedule 3 earnings will you be putting to the side to be investing in advocacy? Because as Jason said, sure, we could be efficient. We need to be more efficient. We could do a lot more with less. And we need more money. The reason why the Schedule 3 was able to happen is because millions of dollars were poured into it over the course of just a couple of years. If you were to look at the overall, the yearly revenue for the organizations that have been in charge of doing broad-based advocacy for the industry, it is not as much as it poured into the rescheduling effort in the last few years, right? And that's where a lot of my sort of frustration comes from, and even my fear around for a long time when we would go into an office, it was very obvious when we talked to them saying, listen, cannabis is in the same scheduled regime as LSD, heroin, and all of these other things. That doesn't make sense, right? People are like, oh. Now we're going to go into offices and be like, let me explain to you the differences of 5 different schedules. Cannabis is actually medically beneficial, but it shouldn't actually be on the schedule at all, right? I feel like we're now in this murky place where the driving home point of why this was such a salient issue and the thing that actually allowed it to sit at the level of all of these other political issues was very much that Schedule 3 or Schedule 1 status. And my fear is that everybody's going to take their ball and go home, and no one's going to remember how important this is, because now it's only the couple million, it's the several million Black and brown folks in the South who are going to be in fear of arrest, who have no real outcome of Alabama and Mississippi legalizing cannabis anytime soon. So who cares that federally it's at Schedule 3, right? Any thoughts about that, sort of the potential of us to actually just rest on our laurels as an industry and not actually do any of that next step stuff?
It's absolutely a fear. And what we're going to see is justice by geography, right? Where if you're in the South or in places like Idaho or the Dakotas, it's a felony to possess cannabis. If you're in places like Colorado, California, the Northeast, fully legal for you to go and purchase cannabis and share with your friends, right? And so we are going to see the South left behind. And I think there is a fear that, like, as this action happens, folks will be like, all right, job's done, right? Like, we already did that cannabis thing. And it will be very difficult to generate momentum to do something even bigger when the industry now would probably oppose that big shift. And so we are looking at a very difficult situation around states that have not passed adult use. And a lot of those states will never pass adult use until we see full legalization at the federal level. And there are a lot of activists that are currently working to figure out exactly how do we turn this around so that we can make sure that doesn't happen. But I am very worried about folks in the South and some of these very red states that are going to continue to see cannabis prohibition, continue, and the folks that will continue to get arrested and incarcerated. And you'll have, a state on one side locking people up for 10, 20 years for cannabis crimes, and another state on the other selling it in, storefronts all across the state. And this is just a very bizarre and unjust situation that doesn't have a lot of easy answers, right? We're going to have to go to those states and also advocate for changes at the state level. But it is true that the move to Schedule 3 can set us back quite a bit when it comes to the movement for full legalization. Now, I do think next year is going to be an important year for our movement. Both the hemp ban is likely to be adjusted or extended, or it might go into law. The Schedule 3 situation will start to work out all the details and see exactly what happens. And if we don't come back strong with a really strong counter argument and counter movement to all of this, we're going to be in a tough place. So this is definitely the time for folks to get involved, to figure out where they can organize. And I encourage folks, no matter what state you're in, to continue to organize for advances in cannabis policy. If you're in a place where adult use is legal, contact your state congressional representatives to make sure that they understand that this is not sufficient, that you want full legalization. And if you're in a place that doesn't have adult use, you're going to need help legalizing at the state level, or at least decriminalizing, to reduce the total potential consequences of a cannabis arrest, and hopefully eventually get to adult use there as well. And so we're not only going to need a 50-state strategy, but each state is going to have a different strategy and a different purpose and a different goal. But again, we have advocates, supporters, champions in every single state. So our challenge, and what I'm asking folks to help us do, is we're going to need to find people in every single state that are willing to fight for whatever gains and progress we can make in that state. And there are enough advocates out there to help you do it. So reach out to myself. You can reach me at jason@lastprisonerproject.org. There are other organizations like the Drug Policy Alliance, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML, organizations like Students for Sensible Drug Policy. If you're a student at the university level, there is a place for you in this movement. And this is absolutely the most important time to get involved that there ever will be again for the history of the cannabis space. So take advantage of that. Help us build this movement on every single campus, every single courthouse, every single state house, and make sure that people hear that we want to see more happen. One thing, all Congress folks, especially in the House, they're all up for re-election. Everybody has one congressman and 2 senators, right? So at bare minimum, you can be pressuring those folks to really move in the right direction. But I do think we're in a tough spot, and we need folks to be able to help us get this done. But also, if we get it done, we'll make history and be able to set the stage for how law will be determined moving forward.
Well, I appreciate all of your work for the many years leading up to now and what you continue to do with the Last Prisoner Project. Definitely want to make sure that people are going to lastprisonerproject.org so they can find out ways to get involved, throw some donation money at them so they can help folks who are currently incarcerated, trying to make sure that they can get out, and to make sure that we do ultimately end prohibition so that no one is in jail for possession of a plant. I think, first off, I appreciate you having this conversation today. There was a lot to process. I think for myself, as you said, I've been kind of checked out. I got a text from a Washington Post reporter last week asking for comment about this, and I had not previously been following along closely enough, right? And so that kind of woke me up and did kind of send a shockwave through the force. And I definitely feel the need to be checking back in, plugging back in, making sure that we're active, getting people involved, making sure that they're informed, and not feeling like we can just sit back and let things happen to us, but ultimately take control of the future here. So Jason, appreciate all your help and getting on here so quickly today to react to the big news, and definitely keep us in the loop. If there's anything we could do to promote anything that Last Prisoner Project is doing going forward.
Absolutely, man. I'm sure there'll be lots of updates to come. So looking forward to checking back in and let you know when we're winning the fight.
Sending lots of good vibes, brother. Appreciate it. And everyone, thank you again for listening to another episode of CalikoVision. Until next time, I'm your host, Kaliko Castille. Aloha.